Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just one moment as we allow people to transition in from the waiting room right now. So good morning. Welcome, everybody. My name is Charlotte Gase Navarro, and I'm the Chief Director of the Hispanic Federation in Puerto Rico. And I would like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the 2023 Farm Bill and Puerto Rico. The time is now to end inequality in SNAP. Through this 1-hour session, we hope to get you up to speed on food security issues in Puerto Rico, and especially the critical and time-sensitive opportunity we have to end discrimination in Puerto Rico's nutrition assistance program by transitioning into the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known as SNAP. Today, we will be joined by various advocates on food security and nutrition assistance in Puerto Rico, including U.S. Senator from New York and member of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. We will also be joined by Hispanic Federation President and CEO Frankie Miranda, the spokesperson for the Coalition for Food Security in Puerto Rico, Lillian Rodriguez Lopez, the Executive Director for the Youth Development Institute of Puerto Rico, Brian Rosat Rodriguez, and I will also be sharing information with you today. Before we begin, I want to review some basics of the webinar. First, because this is a webinar, all participants are muted. And so we encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourselves and where you are joining us from. We also want to let you know that there is a Q&A feature where you can share your questions. There will be time at the end of all of the presentations for you to share those, for us to answer some of those questions. And then also to let you know that this webinar will be presented in English. However, we do have simultaneous interpretation available by clicking on the globe into Spanish. So without further ado, I would like to invite Hispanic Federation President and CEO Frankie Miranda to share some opening remarks.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Charlotte. Good morning. As President and CEO of the Hispanic Federation, I'm very proud to welcome all of you, dear Latino-led organizations, members, and partners to this important webinar. We have people registered from many different places, including Puerto Rico, Florida, New York, North Carolina, Connecticut, New Jersey, Illinois, Georgia, and Washington, D.C., among others. I sincerely want to all of you know that your solidarity with the impacted population on this issue, which are primarily low-income children, elderly, disabled, and working poor families in Puerto Rico, is extremely important and appreciated. As someone born and raised in Puerto Rico, this is very personal to me. As you may know, Hispanic Federation is a 33-year-old national nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting, advocating for, and empowering Latino communities and organizations through our network of more than 600 Latino-led nonprofit organizations across 42 states, territories, and our permanent regional offices in several states, including also offices in DC and in Puerto Rico. Since Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, we have invested over $53 million in private funding towards more than 140 initiatives and nonprofit groups across the archipelago focused on the areas of disaster recovery, housing, food security and agriculture, mental health, economic development, and renewable energy, among others. Over the past 5 years, advancing local sustainable agriculture and economic development has been a major focus of the Hispanic Federation's work in Puerto Rico. But while that long-term work continues, there remains the ongoing and urgent need to address the current hunger and food insecurity experienced in Puerto Rico. Since 1981, U.S. citizens residing in Puerto Rico have been excluded from SNAP and from receiving the same nutrition assistance provided to other low-income Americans, simply because they live in Puerto Rico. This inequity has exacerbated food insecurity, economic challenges, and contributed to historic poverty rates in the archipelago. This federal discrimination in benefits is creating extreme economic distress for the most vulnerable low-income households, particularly during times of natural disasters. This situation forces families to make the difficult decision to leave Puerto Rico for the States and prevents Puerto Ricans in the diaspora from returning. The federal government has the responsibility to respect the dignity and rights of Puerto Ricans to stay in their communities with health and safety. If people want to leave the island or follow new opportunities, they have the right to do so. But Puerto Ricans should not be forced into economic migration from the island. For this reason, Hispanic Federation continues to advocate for equity and the end to systemic discrimination against Puerto Rican in all federal programs. Through our ongoing Take Action for Puerto Rico campaign, and as a member of the Coalition for Food Security, Hispanic Federation has consistently advocated for full integration of Puerto Rico into the SNAP program administered by the USDA. Right now, we can achieve participation if Congress approves the transition language in the 2023 Farm Bill. To learn more about the urgency of this transition and how can we all take action for Puerto Rico to end this injustice and ensure that the 2023 Farm Bill includes Puerto Rico's transition into SNAP, we will be joined by amazing panelists and later by one of our champions leading voices on these pressing issues in Congress, Senator Kristen Gillibrand. Thank you. Mil gracias. Back to you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Frankie. Thank you. So next up, we have one of those amazing panelists. I would like to welcome Brian Rosa Rodriguez, the Executive Director of the Youth Development Institute, one of our Hispanic Federation member organizations based here in Puerto Rico. He is going to be sharing more with you on the current socioeconomic context facing families in Puerto Rico. Thank you, Brian. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte, for that introduction. My name is Brian Rosa Rodriguez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Instituto del Desarrollo de la Juventud, or Youth Development Institute in English. IDJ's mission is to ensure that children and youth in Puerto Rico have access to the opportunities that will allow them to thrive. And we do this work by using data, research, and advocacy efforts, including public policy analysis and evaluation of systems that impact families in Puerto Rico. Let me start by just saying thank you to the Hispanic Federation and to Frankie Miranda for hosting this important conversation. And I'll also note a note of appreciation to my fellow panelists who have been great advocates for children and their families in Puerto Rico around nutrition issues. And also to Senator Gillibrand, who has been a champion for Puerto Rico in the US Senate. I would like to start highlighting a statistic from a family survey that we conducted with over 800 low-income families with children this past December, January, and February of this year. In our survey, we asked families if they fell short of having food to cover the whole month, at least once in the last 12 months. 51% of families surveyed said that this was the case for at least 1 month in their household. Let that sink in. More than half of low-income families that responded to our survey said that their food did not last the full month. This is a survey that was conducted as recent as this year. So unfortunately, this is not surprising. 55% of children on the island live under the federal poverty line. Again, here we see that more than half of the children on the island have to wake up every day carrying the heavy weight of living in poverty. Poverty and food insecurity go hand in hand. And while these problems are complex and require multiple policies and programs to address, to address them, we do have programs in Puerto Rico that are supposed to support families' nutrition, like the Nutritional Assistance Program. The Nutritional Assistance Program is one of the most significant touch points with children and their families, and by and large, one of the most significant economic supports that they receive. 61% of families with children in Puerto Rico participate in the NAP program. As stated in the Department of Family State Plan for 2023, over 300,000 children receive NAP benefits in Puerto Rico for the current fiscal year. This is representing 17% of those participants of the NAP program. However, this program clearly falls short of providing enough benefits for many of these families. Congress has the opportunity to change this by giving Puerto Rico access to the SNAP program. SNAP program operates in all 50 states and some of the territories like the US Virgin Islands. However, families in Puerto Rico do not have access to it. A transition to SNAP will not only increase nutritional security for children, having a positive impact on development, but also will provide increased economic stability for families, providing opportunities and pathways out of poverty by addressing benefit cliffs. Last year, IDJ published a report called Leveraging the NAP to SNAP Transition to promote the economic mobility of families with children and youth. In this study, we analyzed how changes in this program will impact children and their families, and particularly how they can be leveraged to contribute towards poverty reduction, economic mobility, and overall health for children and youth. Overall, our conclusion is that families with children will benefit greatly from a transition from NAP to SNAP. As an example, the net income limits for NAP have increased, but for the typical low-income family in Puerto Rico of a single mother with 1 or 2 children, income limits remain lower than the SNAP program, the federal program. At 0 income or very low income, benefit levels are significantly lower in NAP, limiting families' ability to meet their food and nutrition needs for optimal health and improved outcomes. For example, if we examine the case of a mother with 2 school-age children with a monthly salary of $1,500, $400 in monthly after-school care expenses, and $450 monthly rent and utility cost expenses, the NAP program will allocate to this family around $350 per month, while the SNAP program will give them $513. The transition from NAP to SNAP will help economic mobility for families with children. And there are important considerations that we need to take into account as we make this transition. First, until the transition is effective, the current block grant for NAP needs to increase by at least 57% to meet the needs of families in Puerto Rico and provide parity. Puerto Rico should also have access to a permanent disaster relief fund through DSNAP. As we know, Puerto Rico is prone for natural disasters like hurricanes every year, and this fund should be made available so that we can adjust levels as needed when these disasters occur. We also need to allow low-income full-time undergraduate students into the SNAP program eligibility as well. In conclusion, Congress must enable Puerto Rico to transition out of the block grant model for nutritional assistance into SNAP. SNAP net income levels would be higher for typical families with children in Puerto Rico, and these higher income levels would ensure that working families receive adequate support and alleviate benefit cliff effects, a major barrier for upward economic mobility on the island. I speak to this not only from a research and policy perspective. I am Puerto Rican, born and raised here on the island. And as a young child living in a public housing project in Sabana Bajo, Carolina, I received throughout my upbringing the benefits of the NAP program, like many others in my community. And as a former recipient of NAP, I can speak to how insufficient the block grant model is, not only because the statistics that I shared with you earlier, but also because I could see it in how my mother and the parents of my friends, when I was growing up, the stress that over that 51% of families that answered our survey experience due to not having enough food is real. And the impact on the lives of children as they develop in Puerto Rico is evident. So we must support a transition to SNAP and I encourage our allies to do so as well. The time to act is now, and we have the tools to make a difference for these families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing all of that important context with us, particularly around what families are facing and poverty here, living here in Puerto Rico, and the importance that the food nutrition assistance programs provide to them. I'm going to next share a little bit more, a primer or of sorts, on the NAP program here in Puerto Rico, or the current nutrition assistance program, and and dive a little deeper on some of those inequalities that Brian was referring to. So if we can go to the next slide. So first, I want to step back to something Frankie mentioned. So as the Chief Director of the Hispanic Federation here in Puerto Rico, we have been leading a lot of this work that he's mentioning of the investments on the recovery here in Puerto Rico, and understand that an issue like food security or food sovereignty is a very complex issue here in Puerto Rico that needs a lot of different strategies to resolve it. And so Hispanic Federation has been investing in areas of sustainable agriculture and food security through a lot of different strategies, trying to address this issue, reduce our reliance on importation, strengthen our local agriculture sector, and really think about agriculture in a way that's sustainable here for Puerto Rico. In addition, trying to address these issues of hunger through a multitude of strategies, from investing in mutual aid programs and community kitchens, ensuring that we are here to support our partners in Puerto Rico on emergency relief and resiliency initiatives for the different disasters that we have faced in the last 6 years here in Puerto Rico, investing in small farms. But one of the areas that we also understand is absolutely necessary to address the issue of hunger here in Puerto Rico and to support the economic development is really looking at federal benefits parity. And that includes our SNAP program in particular, or our lack of participation in the SNAP program. So immediately after Hurricane Maria, we began a campaign called Take Action for Puerto Rico to address the diverse issues impacting Puerto Rico's recovery. And one of those issues, again, that we decided really needed to be addressed was the lack of equity, and that's decades of federal discrimination in the various federal benefits programs that were designed to address poverty, those that are known as that social safety net programs in the United States. Puerto Rico lacks access or has inequitable access to the vast majority of these benefit programs. For example, the SSI program, which is intended to support our elderly and people with disabilities. This program is not available at all in Puerto Rico, reducing the financial assistance for our low-income households here in Puerto Rico. And programs such as the one we're discussing today, like the SNAP program or the Nutrition Assistance Program. The lack of access to these programs has absolutely exacerbated the poverty here in Puerto Rico. And as Frankie mentioned, we believe leads directly to people feeling forced to leave so that they can have better opportunities and access to the financial assistance that's available in the United States. So the goal, or one of the goals of our Take Action for Puerto Rico campaign, has been achieving equity in the federal safety net programs. And the one we're discussing today, of course, is that transition from the current block grant program known as the Nutrition Assistance Program, or here in Puerto Rico known as PUN, to what is available in the rest of the United States and many of the territories known as the SNAP program, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We see the opportunity to achieve this change right now through the 2023 Farm Bill. So I want to do a very basic en arroz y habichuelas introduction to what is the Farm Bill, if you have not heard of it before, or if you maybe heard it, but no one's ever explained it. So the Farm Bill is what's known as an omnibus bill. An omnibus bill is really one giant bill under which there's a lot of different laws and policies included inside of this one package. And they approve it every couple of years. So it is a multi-year law. It governs all sorts of projects related to agriculture, programs related to conservation, and importantly, it includes many of the nutrition assistance program, and specifically the SNAP program, program is included in this omnibus bill. Typically, it is a bill that is renewed every 5 years. The last time it was renewed was in 2018. And we are right now on we have a deadline right before us. September 30th is the current deadline for them to finish the negotiation and approve the next farm bill. So we are here feeling this pressure because there is the opportunity to include Puerto Rico now. So what is our current program? For those of you who are not familiar, Puerto Rico since 1981 has been excluded from the SNAP program that the rest of the United States and many of the territories have. So we instead were provided with a block grant program known as the Nutrition Assistance Program. As soon as that change happened, families or households in Puerto Rico immediately saw 25% reduction in the benefits that they receive each month for their food assistance. Because it is a block grant, it means that it is capped. It is not based on need. So as need increases, instead of Puerto Rico receiving more money, which is what would happen for a state in the SNAP program, Puerto Rico instead has to distribute that same block grant, that same pot of money to more people, meaning that households see a reduction in the amount of money they receive. They don't have security of how much money they're going to get each month because it's based on the demand at that time. What this also means is we are not included in what is known as the Disaster SNAP program. Disaster SNAP is a program that when a state or a territory that's part of the SNAP program faces an emergency where the president declares an emergency in that location, for example, when a hurricane hits and you have a disaster and an emergency declaration is made, those locations will automatically see an increase in their SNAP assistance so that they can provide for this increased need. Puerto Rico does not receive that. So what happens there is Puerto Rico has to go back to Congress and advocate in the midst of responding to this disaster and trying to address people's immediate needs. We also have to have a strategy of going back to Congress and advocating for Congress to allocate additional funds to our block grant so that we can respond to that emergency. But that takes months, which means we don't see that additional funding needed for that immediate relief until months after, as many as 6 months after a disaster. So these are some of the challenges that the households here in Puerto Rico who are in need of this emergency assistance are facing during regular days when we're not in a disaster and exacerbated when we are. And we have over, on average, around 1.36 million participants at any given time in our block program, in our NAP block program. And what does that look like? If you look to the chart here, you can see that over 50% of the beneficiaries of this nutrition assistance program are our elderly and children who are living alone. Many of these are single family households as well, led by women. So this is the distribution of our current block assistance program. And as you can see, it is extremely limited and does not provide the needs that a place like Puerto Rico living in extreme poverty is facing. If we move to the next screen, I want to highlight what we mean when we're talking about inequity. One thing I want to clarify, some people think Puerto Rico receives a block grant specifically because it is a territory, but that is not the case. The SNAP program is not only available in all 50 states, but there are also territories who currently have access to the SNAP program. So being a territory does not limit our participation in this. And if we look at this chart that you are seeing, what this provides you is a visual of the inequality that a household of varying sizes from 1 to a 4-person household would experience in the maximum monthly benefit, assuming they were eligible for the maximum monthly benefit of their nutrition assistance program. We see Puerto Rico in the blue under their block grant program. And then you see the 48 states and DC in orange and how much their monthly maximum benefit would be. We see another territory, the US Virgin Islands, there in gray. We see another territory, Guam, in that gold color. Hawaii in the light blue, and Alaska in the green. The reason for the variation here that we are seeing is that there are cost of living adjustments made for varying locations as well. But you can see that across the board, no matter the family household side, Puerto Rico receives significantly less than these other locations, the rest of the places where there is SNAP. When you look at a single family household, Puerto Rico receives 40% less than the 48 states and DC to address the nutrition assistance needs. I also want to clarify that some people think Puerto Rico perhaps has a lower cost of living. Absolutely not the case. In the studies done to evaluate Puerto Rico's cost of living, Puerto Rico and across most of the different categories falls amongst some of the highest costs of living in similar jurisdictions across the United States. So we have a high cost of living, a very high cost of food, a heavy reliance on imported food, which increases our costs, and then we receive less money to actually go out and purchase that food for our lowest income households. I also want to share a different another area where we see inequality in the SNAP program versus the nutrition assistance program, and that is in the income limits or the eligibility. So for the SNAP program, it also, for most of the different household sizes, you're going to see that the SNAP program actually allows for a much higher income eligibility threshold to participate in the program. And so what does that mean for us? In Puerto Rico, it means that there are families who would otherwise be eligible for this program, but because of their income level are excluded. But it also means that there potentially are households who are worried about going out and increasing their income levels with additional job opportunities because they're worried they may suddenly lose eligibility. So there's an economic development opportunity here for us to not only include other working households here, but for those households who are currently participating to also not fear losing their benefits if they were to increase their income. And so that, I think, paints a pretty clear picture of the inequality that Puerto Rico is experiencing and why this is exacerbating our food security. To talk then now about what are kind of our next steps and how we can see this being legislated, and in particular, this opportunity with the Farm Bill, I want to invite Lilian Rodriguez Lopez, who is the spokesperson for the Coalition for Food Security Puerto Rico, who have been advocating through this multi-sector coalition of which Hispanic Federation is a member, has been advocating specifically on this issue for the past few years. So Lilian, welcome.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I want to thank the Hispanic Federation and Instituto for being part of this panel and obviously continuing to not only elevate, but advocate for Puerto Rico's transition into SNAP. Charlotte said that as I heard her presentation, if I wanted to add any additional context, I could. And I also saw that there was a question in the chat about what year are these numbers from. Those numbers are from fiscal year 2022, which is the federal fiscal year. And then obviously Puerto Rico operates under a different fiscal year, which is July through June, but we have a different year for the federal government. But it really doesn't matter because what happens with El PAN or NAP, as it's referred to in the legislation, is it's really about a snapshot in time. So you really have to be looking at a data set that says, what are how many households are in the program? What are those households comprised of? Is it one person, two people, three people? And then I want to highlight this for all of you on the call. It's also about the maximum monthly benefit. So that disparity that you see that exists between Puerto Rico and the 48 states, not everybody in Puerto Rico is getting 165. That's the maximum monthly benefit. And then there's a few, I want to say this, there's an additional dollar amount that's given monthly to older adults. And that depends also on year to year. It could be $22 extra a month. but that's maximum. So people in Puerto Rico can be receiving a lot less than that. It could be $90, $100 a month if they're a one-person household. So I think that's an important distinction. The other thing I want to note is that right now in Congress, October 2024, USDA came out with the new numbers that will be the maximum monthly benefit in a lot of these territories as well as the states. And so we often get compared to the states, not to the territories. So for one person, it's going to go from 281 to 291. For a two-person household, 516 to 535, and so on and so on. So the disparity, unless there's an adjustment in the block grant for Puerto Rico, it's just going to increase. And so, you know, on average in the states, the benefit is 41% higher than what is received in Puerto Rico. And one final statistic is, so that you know, in Puerto Rico, the average household size is one person. So 56% of all people who receive PAN, NAP in Puerto Rico is a single person household. 91% of all the beneficiaries in Puerto Rico live in households that are 3 persons or less. So we're really talking about a mom with 2 children, a working poor, couple with 1 child, or as was already stated, elder, our older adults. So these are really some of the most vulnerable groups. And remember what I said, 1 out of every 2 lives alone. So no safety net there when they lose benefits, or in terms of how they can balance the needs in Puerto Rico between food, energy, and housing, and the other cost of living. So I just wanted to highlight that. Maritere, if we could go to the first slide. Okay. So I'm not going to read this, run through very quickly. The Coalition for Food Security for Puerto Rico was launched back in 2018. It was right after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. It first started with the business community coming together and looking at what was happening post Maria and realizing how big the need in Puerto Rico was for additional nutrition aid. And then it grew to include a lot of the leading hunger and nutrition groups and our, national organizations that are advocating on behalf of Latinos, like the Hispanic Federation, Mazon, Bread for the World. We have academic organizations that have signed on to the cause, trade associations, not only in the States, but also in Puerto Rico, like the Chambers of Commerce, as well as religious organizations. And I mentioned Mazon, Bread for the World, and, Catholic Charities, and many, many others. And we've also seen a huge interest and advocacy that's been coming from across the states, whether it's in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, down in the Southeast from Florida, Georgia, and then obviously all throughout, we have people that are engaging. So this conversation with all of you is very important as we move forward and talk about what we think is possible in the Farm Bill for Puerto Rico as it relates to the transition to SNAP. Next slide. Okay, thank you, Maritere. So we have 2 separate bills that are currently running in Congress that both call for Puerto Rico's transition to SNAP. One is Closing the Meal Gap Act. It has a version which mirrors what's in the Senate and in the House. And then we also have a version, the Puerto Rico Nutrition Assistance Fairness Act of 2023 also has a version in the House and in the Senate, the House version being introduced by Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, who is the resident commissioner as well. And Senator Gillibrand is spearheading both of the bills on the Senate side. Both bills are great bills because they support Puerto Rico's transition into SNAP, but Closing the Meal Gap Act also does some additional things. It really wants to change the calculation of certain benefits and deductions that are available under SNAP. So it looks at the standard medical deduction for elderly and disabled, I mean, everyone would benefit from it, but it would specifically help elderly or disabled, and it also eliminates the cap on the excess shelter expense deduction, and that's actually related to housing and eliminates certain work requirements. It's a great bill, and we support this bill, but it's a lot more complex because it takes and drives other changes in SNAP. The Puerto Rico Nutrition Assistance Fairness Act, which is HR 253 and S 949, really serves to lay out a plan for Puerto Rico, process and timeline for how Puerto Rico would transition into SNAP. It is not an immediate transition because it requires Puerto Rico to submit a plan of operations. It requires the Secretary of the USDA to really look at the plan to make sure that it satisfies all the requirements under SNAP, and then of course to send it to Congress to certify it. It allows under up to a period of 5 years for that transition to take place. And so within that transition, there's different steps that the government of Puerto Rico and the legislature of Puerto Rico, and obviously the Department of Family Services, which manages PAN in Puerto Rico, they would have to be involved in all of those steps. In July of 22, USDA did an update to a report that had come out in 2010 about Puerto Rico's readiness to transition, and they determined that Puerto Rico was ready to transition. The biggest actions that would be required relate to several areas. It's the technology integration for Puerto Rico, and meaning taking the systems that they currently have and integrating them into SNAP. It's the workforce and sort of hiring people and making sure that they have the capabilities and are trained to work within the SNAP system. The vendors in Puerto Rico who currently accept the PAN card, the NAP card, the EBT card would be transferred and would be certified, not by Puerto Rico any longer, but by the USDA. And then the USDA has other things that they have to do as well to prepare to bring Puerto Rico into the program. So they've estimated in that study that it would take up to 10 years if things were not concurrent. But at this point, in the process, Puerto Rico has been working. So thank you, Maritere, for bringing me to this next slide. This is what Puerto Rico has done and some of their actions towards SNAP transition. Obviously, the governor of Puerto Rico and the government is supportive of the transition. So are the legislative bodies in Puerto Rico, the House and the Senate. So they've actually approved dollars for transition. As I mentioned, the USDA report noted that the transition could take up to 10 years, but if things happen concurrently, it could be anywhere from 5 to 7 years, 3 to 6 years, depending. I noted about the transition requiring those investments in technology integration and training and all of that. In addition to that, the government of Puerto Rico has already taken steps by visiting states where the USDA noted that these were sort of best practice states. So they've gone in and met and had teams looking at the way different parts of the SNAP program are managed. And then they've been developing a multi-year budget. Puerto Rico has a monitoring board known as the Promesa Board. They're supportive of the transition as well because they believe that by keeping Puerto Rico out of SNAP, it has limited sort of the workforce development in Puerto Rico because people are either, fear of loss of benefits, they stay underemployed and in some cases unemployed. So there was a recent pilot that was just launched on September 1st. One region in Puerto Rico, the region of Carolina, to try to provide employment and training. These are not work requirements, but employment and training to beneficiaries of NAP in Puerto Rico. Before you move on, Maritere, right now, just to close out, the Puerto Rico Nutritional Assistance Program, the bill in the House and the Senate particularly in the Senate, has a good number of sponsors, more sponsors than, Closing the Meal Gap has. The House bill that the resident commissioner introduced, including herself, has 20 co-sponsors, 20 sponsors, 15 are Democrats, and 5 are Republicans. The Senate bill has 15 sponsors, including Senator Gillibrand out of the 100 sponsors. I just want to emphasize and thank the Federation for having this call. I want you guys to know, and I'm going to use a strong phrase, on this bill for Puerto Rico, we are in the fight of our lives. It is going to take a village to ensure that Congress doesn't state, no, we can't do this because we can't afford this for Puerto Rico. There's something known as the CBO score, the Congressional Budget Office score. We're still waiting for that. It's being requested by Democrats, but also mostly by Republicans, to see what would the cost of Puerto Rico's transition be. Number one, we don't have, thank you, Charlotte. I'm looking at the notes and everything. It's not immediate. It's going to take several years. So we are looking at maybe 5 years from now, 3 years from now, that Puerto Rico could actually transition, number one. And number two, there's different types of dollars that are needed. One for the transition, another one for Puerto Rico to be able to operate under SNAP, because there's a share, and then actually the cost of the funds that actually go to people through the EBT program. And it's actually one of the most direct ways we can help families in Puerto Rico, because there's no third parties, there's no contractors. So this is just sort of a quick outline. I'm sure they're going to share the deck with you, but we really do need a show of force in the states with your local legislators to be able to say this matters to people, not only in Puerto Rico, but also in the states. And using that strategy of pushing and contacting and advocating locally on a state level basis, we've seen some success, in partnership with the Federation and so many of our other partners in terms of members co-sponsoring the bill. So thank you. I'll be here for the Q&A. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you. So one of the questions that was already asked, and we're gonna start to answer that one here with these next set of slides, is what can we do? Lillian mentioned, right, this is going to take a village. We need everybody to act. And so we have created a tool here as part of our Take Action for Puerto Rico campaign that allows you to very easily contact your representatives in Congress, your senators, your House representatives, and let them know that you want them to ensure that this transition is included in the Farm Bill, that this legislation for Puerto Rico is included in the Farm Bill. And so I'm going to walk you through that tool right now. It's very simple, and it's something that you can share on your social media. You can share it with your friends and family, especially in the more diverse states that we can push this out to, the better. So let me walk you through here. We're going to go to our next slide. We're going to take you through 2 different QR codes. This first QR code will take you to our website, which Jailene has also helped us by dropping the link into the chat. So you can, with your telephone, pull out your telephone, and this QR code will take you to the Take Action for Puerto Rico website, of which, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll find a button that says Take Action here. So you can share this website, and that will allow you to get access to our tool. But if we switch to our next slide, this QR code will take you directly to the tool to contact your representatives. And you can do so either by Twitter, which is now called X. We still have the old icon there, but Twitter, or by email, whichever you prefer. And so essentially the way this works is, again, you pull out your phone, you're going to get to this page, you're going to put in your personal information, in particular, very important, your address and your zip code. Once you include your address and your zip code there, it will automatically identify who your representatives are in Congress, both in the House and in the Senate. And it will automatically send the email to their offices or to their Twitter handles. So it does that work for you. You will have to take 2 steps if you want to do both an email and Twitter. You'll have to make sure first you do the email and then you send the tweets out, but it's essentially the same process for both. There is already a pre-written email there for you, which you are able to edit and adapt however you would like to so that you can put it into your own words, but we've set up a template for you that you're welcome to use. If you are in Puerto Rico, it will send it to the resident commissioner specifically. And so that is the access to our tool. This is something, again, that you are welcome to share with anyone, anywhere across the United States and the territories. If you think they would help, send this out and contact their representatives. The more representatives that we can reach, the better. So with that, I want to move us into our Q&A and see what questions we have. I think we just answered the first, which is what we could do and the different ways we could take action. I want to add on to that question for a moment and ask Lillian if you could just let us know as well, if in addition to our own representatives, those who represent our state and communities, are there any very particular members of Congress that we could also choose to send this letter to, or who we could outreach to? Any critical states that perhaps we want to target that you could let folks on this call know in case they have friends or family in those locations, or in case they themselves are located in those states?
So these are some critical states for contact. One is Michigan, and it is Senator Debbie Stabenow. She is the chair of Senate Ag. The ranking member for Senate Ag is from Arkansas, John Bozeman. That's on the Senate side, but she's very, very important in Michigan as chair. On the House side, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, but he's actually from Harrisburg. The House Ag chairman, Republican member G.T. Thompson. So Pennsylvania, very important. And the ranking members from Georgia, it's David Scott. So if I had to ask you guys to target, I would say, please, 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 Michigan and Pennsylvania and Arkansas.
Thank you, Lillian. And I see a message in the chat that asks if we can share a list that they can use as sort of a cheat sheet in case they forgot or didn't capture the names. I think the first thing perhaps we can start by sharing in the chat the names of the members you just mentioned so that we can capture it there. And then perhaps that's something we can add then to the website as an additional ask for folks to target. Right. And communicate with, especially, again, if you know people in those states or if you yourself are in those states. I see another question in the chat that's both for us and Senator Gillibrand, who is going to be joining us in just a moment. But I want to share the question asked by Edgar, which is really about data, right? And ensuring that the USDA, the Food Access Research Atlas, which is provided by the USDA, doesn't include Puerto Rico or the territories. It provides information, as Edgar lays out here, an overview of food access indicators for low income and other census tracts using different measures of supermarket accessibility. It provides food access data for populations with census tracts, and it also offers census tract level data on food access that can be downloaded for community planning or research purposes. And the question then that Edgar is asking is if there is a way we can work on getting resources through the 2023 Farm Bill to add the data needed to this atlas so that Puerto Rico's data could be included. This is a great question, Edgar. I know we are constantly concerned about the lack of data available for a variety of topics here in Puerto Rico. With this current 2023 Farm Bill, I'm not sure if you know of any efforts that have already been made to do that. Again, I think as we mentioned, there's a deadline even of just this week for this Farm Bill. So I think a new campaign might be difficult to get it into this farm bill, but I think it's a fantastic issue to add even outside of the farm bill and work with USDA to see how do we ensure Puerto Rico's data gets added to that. Brian, I know you work with data all the time. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or some of the challenges that the Youth Institute or El Instituto has had over the years in accessing some data related to Puerto Rico, particularly for many of these different issues that Edgar is sharing here, or any kind of workarounds that perhaps IDJ has utilized to get data for Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Edgar, for that question. And I think you bring a very important point here. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico is left out of some of the census and USDA surveys that collect data on nutrition, on poverty issues, and many others. At the Institute, we gather data to produce index on the well-being of youth and children. I'll be happy to share the link of the data that we have available through data from the census and other programs in Puerto Rico that may help you to understand the conditions of children and families around nutrition. But a workaround that we've had to employ at the Institute is we've actually had to go and survey families to collect data directly from them. So in particular, I'll share also the link of the report that has the findings of our survey. It will be publishing later on more robust findings there. But yes, it's an issue that we must take on, and I'm happy to continue the conversation around that.
Thank you, Brian. And so we have one remaining question, and I'm not sure who can perhaps answer it. The question is, how can organizations who work with people who are homeless and providing dinner for the community, is there any way that they can also be a part of SNAP? And as I understand your question, wondering how can you participate in SNAP in a way that you can help provide food? That's how I'm understanding that question from Tamar Cintron. So are there any ways within the SNAP program that support can be provided for people who are homeless, or for organizations specifically who work with people who are homeless and work with providing for the community? Is there any funding in SNAP that is actually for community organizations and that is not for direct beneficiaries? Lillian, do you know the answer to that question? I think the answer is that SNAP is exclusively for individuals, but I want to double check that with you.
That's a complicated question. There are pilots, and I see that we have the senator on the phone, so I'm very eager to hear from her. And we can always loop back on with more specificity, but there are states that are providing and do provide SNAP benefits to homeless individuals. The issue is, where is the address of record, right? And how are they being served? Mostly it's not for nonprofits to be able to participate in SNAP. It goes to individuals, but there are other programs, obviously, and other federal benefits provide funding for organizations that are feeding the homeless. It wouldn't be SNAP, but homeless are eligible under SNAP to receive benefits. They just have to, be able to show an address of record and receive those benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. And so then without further ado, I'd like to invite Frankie Miranda, President of Hispanic Federation, back to welcome our final guest for today.
Well, thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to all the panelists. Now I have the honor to present someone that has been a champion on this issue in Congress. She's essentially an ally in all our fights for equity and food security for not only U.S. citizens, but also for those in Puerto Rico. She took concrete actions by introducing the Puerto Rico Nutrition Assistance Fairness Act and closing the Meal Act in Congress. We're very thankful for her dedication and ongoing effort on this vital issue, and for her openness to listen and work with Puerto Rico and all our organizations who are advocating on this matter. Please welcome U.S. Senator from New York, Kristen Gillibrand.
Well, thank you so much, Frankie, for your really warm and wonderful introduction. And thank you for your leadership and advocacy and partnership on so many of the important issues for Puerto Ricans across America. Thank you for having me for this part of this conversation. I also want to recognize and thank our moderator, Charlotte Gossa-Navarro, and our panelist, Lillian Rodriguez-Lopez, who I've been working with for years on issues of nutrition and how to support Puerto Rico and how to support our Puerto Rican families across the country. I also want to recognize our panelist, Brian Rosa Rodriguez, for her advocacy. That makes a huge difference to be able to hear directly from people that these types of cuts deeply affect. I appreciate everyone for speaking out for the more than 3 million Americans living in Puerto Rico today. It's bad enough that the residents of Puerto Rico have to face such devastation and destruction from a number of recent storms. They shouldn't have to be struggling to eat. As you've already talked about today, Puerto Ricans deserve the same nutrition assistance as every other American citizen. Here on the mainland, when a family is hungry, they can be eligible for SNAP. The SNAP program is the most effective feeding program we have in this country. But if you live in Puerto Rico, instead, you are getting NAP, which is a block grant that doesn't increase based on need. So Puerto Rico gets the same amount of money, regardless of how many families are suffering. So when something happens like a pandemic or a hurricane, and suddenly many more people need help, they cannot easily get it. Under NAP, disasters and emergencies require separate new funding for Congress every time. That can take months, if not years. Can you imagine having to wait on Congress for your next meal? It's absurd. It's very hard for Puerto Ricans to deal with some of these challenges because of the nature of the disasters. Imagine surviving a hurricane, having your home destroyed, loved ones injured or killed, and then after all that, you still have food insecurity. You don't have enough to eat. It's unfair, it's unjust, and it's just plain old wrong. 40% of Puerto Rican households were food insecure in the early months of the pandemic compared to basically 15% of all US households. And that was before Hurricane Fiona damaged crops and the roads needed to distribute food. My colleagues and I have been fighting for years to get the financial support that Puerto Rico needs. And now I'm pushing to include language in the Farm Bill to transition Puerto Rico from NAP to SNAP. Our Puerto Rico Nutrition Assistance Fairness Act would start the transition so that residents have the nutritional assistance they need to move forward. Congress should have never revoked Puerto Rico's eligibility for SNAP. It was unfair and unjust in 1981, and it's just as unfair and unjust today. It's clear that this legislation has broad-based multi-sectoral support, and hungry Puerto Ricans don't have time to waste. America is the richest country in the world. We cannot allow our own citizens to go hungry just based on where they live. Your voices are really important. Please call your congressional representatives to make sure that they understand how urgent moving Puerto Rico from NAP to SNAP is. Please call all the Ag Committee members, Democrat and Republican, to make sure every single one of them supports this legislation. I want to thank you all for the advocacy. I want to continue to work with each of you and the Hispanic Federation on your agenda and the priorities that you have for this year. I also want to fight for all Puerto Rican families for the fairness that they deserve. So thank you again for including me in this excellent webinar.
Thank you, Senator, my senator, for being here and for all the work that you do. We just have one question before you go, and it's like, what are the real chances that SNAP for Puerto Rico will be included in the Farm Bill this year? What is what you're seeing based on everything that is happening right now in Congress?
I'm not optimistic, and I can tell you I am very concerned because of the way the House is dealing with this budget crisis. They're shutting down government instead of coming up with a bipartisan support. They don't like SNAP at all. So they don't want any Americans to have SNAP. They would like to cut SNAP across the board for everyone. And so enhancing SNAP is going to be a real challenge. So I would urge all of our advocacy to start focusing on senators on the Agriculture Committee, Democratic senators. I want to make sure there's not a Democrat on that committee who isn't fighting as hard as they possibly can to get this done. And so I would really focus on making sure that this is the one thing that Democrats on the committee ask for all the things the Republicans are going to ask for. We've been unable to get a Republican lead, and that's really problematic. So now I want us to make sure we don't lose any Democrats, starting with the chairwoman of the committee and straight on down. I think this has to be literally immediate and emergency advocacy, because the last meeting I had with the committee members, it was not positive. And I was very alarmed to hear that. So we have to revamp our advocacy towards Democrats right now.
You heard it from everybody. Thank you, Senator. I know that you are extremely busy. You heard it from the senator. It is important that everybody in this call, in this webinar, take action for Puerto Rico. Go to the link that is provided in the chat and start communicating with all of these members of these committees so we can get SNAP for Puerto Rico and the fairness for everybody in Puerto Rico. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to the senator, our panelists. We will continue the fight. Take action for Puerto Rico.
Thank you, Frankie. Thank you, everyone. Take care.